Right. Nathan, welcome.
Thank you.
Russell back again. Who wants to lead?
Russell.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I was going to play Wheels on the Bus for the highlight of the afternoon, but I was discouraged by my colleagues here that I didn't think that was
We
appropriate.
could sing it.
Thank you for the earworm.
We could do.
Oh, you're right.
Rhiannon, can you make this thing work, please? Yeah, excellent. So this afternoon we're going to run through our passenger transport, and I brought Nathan Gill, who you hopefully will have known. Nathan and I collectively manage our passenger transport activity on the day-to-day. Nathan looks after the operational side of the world, and he coordinates with our contractor GoBus and does an awesome job making sure the buses continue to run out there in the world. So just a little bit of statistics about what we do, and hopefully you've seen some of this before. Our contractor is GoBus. We have to go to tender in 2024. Our contract will expire. At the moment we have 6 spline based routes for the city, so that sort of circulates in and out of the hub, and we run between 7:20 and 5:20 Monday to Friday, and 10 and 3 generally on Saturdays. Peak periods we run 30-minute peak headways, so that means bus comes every 30 minutes. So during those times we have 6 buses on, and the off-peak we have 3 buses running. We have 5 school bus routes which come across the city morning, evening, and we run a service for the Recycle South 2 trips. Put some numbers in there in terms of just in the last couple of days we've just looked at the year end of June, so we've gone from 100,000 odd trips in 22 to 125, which is, I guess, somewhat more encouraging than post-COVID, but it's certainly down on where we've been in the past, but that's actually less depressing than we could otherwise have seen it. So we've gone from 73 to 93 during our peak times. Our fare box has risen a little bit as well, so it's up as well, and our current fare, which we enacted on the 1st of July, has gone in line with their fees and charges to $2.20 for a B card and $3 cash. And the bottom line is probably the one that has just been happening as well. So obviously Super Gold is between 9 and 3, where you get free if you're over 65 with your Super Gold card. But we also have the Community Connect discount now, or concession now, whereas if you have got a community services card, you can go online or come in and you need a concession loaded on your card and you get half price fares. If you are under 12 years old and you have your correct age on your B card registered, you can travel for free, and if you're between 13 and 24 years old and you have your age on your B card and it's registered, you can travel at half price. So they're the things that the government have just put in place, and those concessions are supported by the government.
Excuse me, Russell, through your chair. Is that for student bus rides as well?
Yep. Any service that what's the right word? Services that we run. So all of our bus smart buses, so, and school buses. So hopefully we'll see more kids travelling to and from school, but at the moment, to be fair, the fare's been half price for the last 9 months, 10 months. So, and that's helped us a little bit, but technically if it hadn't otherwise it was going to increase. But what the key message that we continue to want to be out in the community is, you got to get these concessions on your B card. If you don't, you'll get at worst the $2.20. If you turn up and you're an under 12-year-old and you're paying cash, you'll pay $3. So there's a learning cycle that they will have to learn pretty quick. These are just a bit of a graphics about what we're talking about. On the left, the coloured ones is how it all works. So they basically have use a common road on the way out, so that if you're travelling home, you travel and jump off. If you're coming back in, you get on the other side of the road and you come back in, and that's what our customers sought so therefore it reduces your travel time. Unfortunately, one of the downsides of some of that is that it actually limits a little bit about the coverage we have, but in the design of it, we looked really closely about where the patronage was. And on the right hand side, just as a brief overview, it's about, I've taken 3 of the 5 school bus routes, and just as an indicator of where the school bus routes really do meander through the urban area to pick up kids and drop them off at the high schools predominantly on the way there. So, and it's pretty well used, that service. It's the buses are well patronised, so it's actually really quite positive. The second part of what we also deliver is our total mobility services. So total mobility is a service that you're assessed that you can't necessarily use our other passengers transports by some independent assessors, and then you can travel on a subsidised use of small passenger service vehicles, i.e. what they used to be called as taxis, with a card, and you get a concession paid. So we have 7 operators in Invercargill who offer that service, 1 in Gore. We have 10 hoist vehicles in Invercargill, so if people with disabilities and wheelchairs, so they can have a choice. So there's, I guess, quite a number. In 22, we had 2,000 registered users, and we've now got 2,302 is the number Nathan gave me just the other day. So I guess that's a good sign. Lots of communities have lots more, but that's actually people's ability. It's their willingness to assess and then join the scheme and get the card. So it's there for them to use. Total trips, 59,000 in 22 and 82,000 in 23. Now, part of that is because the government during that time offered a further 25% subsidy incentive. So at the moment, it's generally 50-50. So if there's a $20 fare, the customer used to pay $10, and then $10 would be paid by council, and then NZTA and us would share that. The government has, of more recent times, said, I guess it was when the fuel and those sorts of things were being subsidised, that they would pay a further 25%. So the customer now only pays 25% of the cost. The impact of that, unfortunately, or fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, depends on if it's a budget manager you're looking at. Our trips have gone from 59,000 to 82,000, which is a 140% rise, which means our budget spend is really under pressure, including our subsidy from Wakatahi. So that's costing trips about another $300,000 a year, of which we get back half of that. So there's quite a lot of pressure on our budget in that area. But I guess the upside is that our community feels welcomed to be able to use the service more frequently than otherwise. So the fare cap's $50, so no one trip can exceed $50 for a trip. So that's what we place. Some trips are more expensive if they go somewhere, but we cap it at $50, so our input's $25. Just a little bit about our priorities and how we respond to the approach. And I guess what we need to do is we really just are saying our response to our outcomes is really to continue our current approach, but investigate some further delivery options, which we'll come to. And I guess the other big thing is really us looking to say who is the best person to deliver these regional services. Just a little bit about our budget, like we've seen before. Our OPEX is about 2.8 million, and we get about $1.7 million in terms of revenue back in. So I guess the pressures that we will continue to have is our fare box recovery is always a ratio, and that's a number that Wakatahi is always interested in seeing. And the fare box is how much we take from people paying divided by the cost of the service. Our fare box is sort of in the around the low 20%, and they're looking for it to be much higher than that. So I guess that's an impact most regions have suffered post-COVID. Certainly the big centres have a much better fare box recovery, but lots of their services are to reduce congestion, whereas ours has a strong community element. I guess the thing that Nathan and I talk quite a bit about is if you weren't able to drive today, how would you come here today? What are your choices? And for some people, that is their only choice, is to catch a bus. And I guess we've seen 125,000 trips because people have chosen or don't have other options. So it's quite a lot of travel for people to, if you didn't have that service. So some of the things that we need to look at considering over the next, through our activity plan, our on-bus announcements, and we have had some presentations to council. I guess that's how do we deliver that, and we still believe we need to make sure that the solution is good for all users on the bus, and we believe an app-based solution has to be out there, so we've continued to work down that rather than necessarily where we've been in the past, which had a whole range of positives but also some downsides where we had to continue to maintain it, and it was quite expensive and it was hard to have on or off if you wanted it. We recognise that we've still got some work to do on reviewing some of our school bus routes. It's been a long time since we've looked at it, but they are pretty successful, so not 100% sure we need to change something that's not broken, but it's a good chance to have a think about what it does do. On-demand services are things which are growing in a number of trials across the country, 4 or 3,
At least 4.
which is really a taxi service on steroids, I suppose, is one way, where you actually dial up and they tell you where to go to be picked up, and it's a piece of software that calculates those. But there are some ups and downs of that, but most people have layered that over their existing service and then decided which one's the better service to deliver. So there are some positives and there are some disbenefits. Bus sizing is something that we will need to look at, about how big do our buses need to be, especially since we have to think about how do we decarbonise buses and have e-buses. Not allowed to have diesel buses beyond, new buses brought onto any subsidised service beyond 2025. So there's some real positives of that, but there's some real costs, given that an e-bus is twice as expensive as a normal bus, and given that you have to have the infrastructure to charge them. So that's a piece of Whakakate requirement through the new, it used to be called the PTOM, and which is the passenger transport operating model, but there's a new piece they're working through. And the thing we need to continue to keep a focus on is our declining passenger numbers might have not, it's how do we actually keep them growing? Do we have other incentives? Can we market more? How do we actually get people back onto buses? And what other levers are available to our council to actually encourage the use of them? And we talked a little bit about the Community Connect. Our new contract, when we're out to tender, we will find out what that cost is. It's been quite a period of time since we've been to the market, 9 years, so there's possible that the costs might be more than we're currently paying, which could be a challenge. We've talked about our e-buses. Driver wage payments is another challenging position for our community, in that the government has set a range of expectations through announcements in the past while about what levels they expect driver pay levels to be, but at the end of the day it is actually a council decision about what level you wish to pay it, and they're suggesting that rural bus drivers should be paid $28 an hour and urban bus drivers are being paid $30 an hour. Whether or not we choose to do that will be something that we'll need to have some further conversations on, but that places quite a significant additional financial burden on the service and our budgets. The second part, as I mentioned briefly, is that the total mobility has some, I guess, the increased subsidy, the lower travel costs. We're seeing 40 and 50% increase in the actual cost, and to be fair, we don't have really useful ways to actually control that level of spend. How you limit people's saying, in the past we used to have chits where you could have 6 or 10 or 20 a month. The new electronic world is a little bit more difficult to deal with, so we have to work on that. And our last piece of work is a national ticketing system, which is a thing that will replace our RITS B card over the next 3 to 5 years, roughly, which means you can travel anywhere in the country on one standard. You don't have to have a different card in Invercargill, different card in Christchurch, different card in Wellington.
It's sort of like a snapper card.
It is, you just need to have a credit card because it's an open loop system. So that's a thing that's coming, which will just give us something else to do during the day, but that'll be fine. The things that we probably can't control and will need to do is the driver wages. There is a huge expectation in the community, and certainly in unions and community, about what that means to us. The e-bus changes, apologies. The e-bus changes, it's going to certainly set us up through a tendering process. We haven't seen many small e-buses at the moment, and you can't buy second-hand buses. So, and the demand, everybody's got them. So, how that really works out, and the total mobility is an ongoing. Currently, the government has said it's an indefinite subsidy, so that will have some ongoing impacts for us. We really want to have a conversation about whether we have less trips. So what I'm saying is, do we need them earlier in the morning or later in the evening, or do we need them on weekends? Where are we heading with that? The way to make cost savings was we might put our fares up some further. Let's see how our current one's going, but each year you have the opportunity to at least have that conversation. But how do we actually make sure we have more people using it? It's the real challenge. So really moving into a section about what are the proposals and what are the options that we actually have to consider. So the things that we have here, and we'll have some options later on, are the things we've heard in early discussions are that probably we would like to have an earlier bus, because at the moment you can catch a bus to get in to work at 8 o'clock from the suburbs, but if you started at Harbour 7 you don't. So, and if you don't catch the 5:20 bus, you have to walk. So probably a bit lean and a bit mean on that, and at the weekends and on public holidays we have relatively limited services. And there's conversations that we've heard about, are we providing services to Bluff, Otara / airport and around the CBD. So similar to the previous ones, I've tried to pull those together and actually put a bit of a slide up of some of the costs that we see, and we can certainly circulate this along with the other roading one where you can give us some feedback. But we're suggesting that if you actually have a bus service, that service is going to cost us probably $300,000 the first year and then $250,000 a year. We'll be hopeful that we get some subsidy on that, but we may not do. But that's our best guess at the moment. If we go into an on-demand service, that we see that we'll need an extra $100,000 over and above what we're currently doing. If we have some service to Otara in a limited scope, we're saying it's probably going to cost us $150,000 a year, but we're suggesting that's further out until we see what need there is. Our new bus contract we're anticipating will cost us more. We've got some transition costs for our NTS, and our additional trips at the beginning and end of the day, we think it's going to cost us another $100,000 a year. And our total mobility services, that's sort of our half share of what it's going to cost us anyway. We're incurring it at the moment, and we're seeing an increased cost because the cost adjustment type stuff is growing hugely. So we're seeing our BAU costs are going up as well. I'm sorry, that's just pushing buttons. So in our on-boarded facilities, we think it's going to probably cost us about $80,000 a year to actually provide that on-bus service for audio type stuff. That's the order of cost that we will need to have the audible announcements.
Sorry,
we-
can I just ask a question about that, Russell? The previous service, how much did that cost?
of a similar nature.
Oh, sorry, no different then. Thanks.
We just think it has to be a better technology to deliver than what we previously did 10 years ago. We've moved on so far in that technology. There has to be a solution, and it seems strange that no one else around the country has actually got an app-based solution that tells you where you are and where the next stop is. It just seems we do everything else online or in an app.
Some kid could.
I use maps all the time and it tells me when the next bus is coming when I'm in Wellington or where to catch it. And
We have that in Invercargill as well on Track a Bus, so you can do that exactly. You can actually look online and see the little bus telling you when it's going to be 2 minutes away. But it's actually when you're on the bus, it's the next stop announcement is the issue that we face. But
or you can follow the bus and it tells you the stops ahead of you.
yeah, we're really wanting it so when you're in there, you can have
Something in your
you
ear.
can hear it or you can listen to it. So.
It was a submission that we had
know.
from Association of Blind Citizens.
And I guess we've been fortunate, is that we've had that well in advance of many other places around the country. So that's a pretty big investment we made for a long time. So what we've got here is our reasonably, these are the KPIs that we're currently being measured on. So that's what we still continue to look for, which are about, passenger boarding, satisfactions. And the thing with satisfaction surveys is actually where do you source your data. We do one on an annual basis. We use students over December to measure, and I know Rhiannon does some other community ones, and sometimes they are different because they test a different market, but it's about being sure what you're trying to demonstrate, whether you're doing a good job. But a lot of them are about the customers who are using the service and how satisfied they are whilst they're doing it. So. And that really just shows us where we're currently trying to seek about a 70% customer survey satisfaction from our onboard. That's where we've been getting that data. We have to capture a whole lot of this data for our Wakatahi annually, and that's part of that service. Total mobility is a really difficult one to measure because we don't actually necessarily have access to those people to actually survey them. So we just consider we have an annual meeting where all the providers are and the sector can come in and tell us how we're doing. So I guess that's how we measure it. But some of our issues are Nathan and I have been fulfilling these roles, but they're not necessarily our roles, and we haven't been able to fill roles. So how we resource this going forward is actually a real challenge, and the thing will be is who's best to manage. We have the delegation from Environment Southland and have had so for probably near 20 years, I would guess. And is it still appropriate? It could be something to work through. We do need to work through our regional public transport plan, which is the PT version of the long-term plan. And I think some of the regional type activities in there, which could be an inclusion of, is there a business case for a fare subsidy to Stewart Island? I know there's not been much uptake from Wakata on that basis. And we need to continue to replace bus shelters. So this is really where we got to with the similar to the roading or the roading one, which is really the areas where we see we've got some investment and really keen at some stage for council to give us some direction about whether there are the sorts of things that we want to include in our activity plan and in our budgets going forward. So they're just the things I've brought forward, but happy to try to explain some of those questions.
Okay, we'll start with Trish, then Evelyn.
I've got a number, Chair, thank you. Just going to throw something at you. So can I start first of all about the money that you get in the fare box? If you accelerate the number of students travelling on the buses, that's government funded, so that will mean more money in your pockets?
Correct. For every trip we get the equivalent fare funded from the government.
Yeah.
So if we could double the number of children travelling, we would get twice as much money from that area.
So my next question is, what are you doing to promote this in the schools?
To be fair, we don't have a strong communication strategy with the schools, but it is well used and it's well known.
But the new under 12 free.
We haven't necessarily seen that as a strong sector. We also need to be sure that we've actually got enough capacity to deliver the service. Could be one of our problems if every kid wants to catch a bus to school, we might need more buses.
Right. So I'm looking at this from education point of view. So I've got a number of things that I believe you could do. I think possibly you could contact the Minister of Education down here and get them to get some comms out to the school. And let them know what's going on. We have a particular problem with refugees coming to Invercargill. They tend to live right down, the housing that we can get quite often is right down south Invercargill. And, this weather that we're having is totally difficult for them. And with the school situation, the zoning, a child who lives next door to the taxi centre, there by Pit Bastards, he's only zoned for Aurora, so he has to be able to get to Aurora and back, and his siblings to their school. So the zoning in Invercargill makes it really difficult for kids to use the buses, and I know that you're aware of that, but I do think it's a consideration.
I guess that's part of what the government's initiative is to try to put more. If you teach your kids how to catch buses, they're more likely as adults to want to as well. So that's probably one of the deficiencies we have is over the last generation we haven't caught buses.
Yeah, and their communities.
Can I just say too that every refugee family has been given by the council our cards.
Yes, and they are used to using buses. So if you could try and perhaps look at those bus routes, particularly, down south was the difficult one. And anyway, just a consideration. I've got a few more things. Sorry, Bluff. Many of the students who are at Bluff have difficulty getting into the high schools, or a school of their choice, because Bluff goes to year 7, 8, and then they come to high school at year 9 where they can get a bus. We don't want to discourage them not going to their local school, but there's no choice.
I understand exactly, but I just think we just got to be really careful that we don't overlap the MOE's responsibilities to bring kids as well. And there's a really subtle balance between a Bluff bus service that takes.
Oh, you wouldn't want it for the children, because it would create things. But I'm thinking about the community. If there was a bus that came into Invercargill at say 8 o'clock or something and returned at 3:30, then it might even be able to, for the community of Bluff, to be able to use that, or even better if it was an on-call bus. But that's something you've already talked about. Have you thought of hybrid buses instead of e-buses?
I guess the decarbonising says you just don't want to have diesel buses, so it doesn't necessarily limit what they are. I'm not sure there's that many hydrogen buses.
No, not hydrogen.
But a hybrid.
Yeah.
When we go to tender, we'll be quite specific about what the rules across the country have allocated, and we're quite fortunate that the passenger transport world is now much more connected because of our B card and our RITS work, so accessing people who have already done this is actually really easy for us.
I mean, what you've got is excellent. I mean, from what it used to be, it really is. But I'm questioning also whether you need to do bus shelters. If you have an on-call bus site, they won't need the bus shelter.
Bus shelters are a really thing that Nathan enjoys mostly. A little bit. And I didn't say that. And we have looked quite closely, certainly when we changed the routes. Nathan spent lots of time identifying where you can put them, and it's really surprising how many people
don't want one.
NIMBY, yep, not outside. And I have to say, I used to be one of those.
They want to use them, but they just don't.
They're really keen, but they're not in key. They're not
outside their house.
Yeah, not outside my place.
Outside their space.
So we've spent quite a bit of time identifying suitable locations and working really closely. So, but at the same time, we've thought quite a lot about where they are in the route, how many passengers are actually getting on and off. So it's not just randomly trying to find a spot. We've thought through this quite a bit. To further invest, yes, we'll need new shelters, but we just need to be really careful that we actually put them in the right place. And having better shelters that aren't necessarily defaced and broken and otherwise, actually, if they're not an eyesore. But we also didn't, for a period of time, have seats in them, because we know that if you have seats in them, everybody does other things other than sitting in them after the hours. So it's trying to find a balance about what you do in the right places. So,
And many bus shelters overseas have bars, you know, just a bar that you can lean against if you're someone like me who needs to get the weight off your feet, but not a seat.
we have done that for a period of time and meet quite a bit of community resistance for not having a seat. So.
Okay, all right. So those are my questions. I mean, I love what you're doing, but I think we've got to keep trying to make the. The last one was surely on a Sunday we could have every third Sunday or something have the buses coming into town. How can some people access the mall and places like that if we don't have?
We could do anything you wish to fund.
I know. just those are my thoughts.
Oh my
Thank
God,
you.
Tom's back.
Okay, Evelyn.
So, unsurprisingly, as a bus user, I have one or two things. But first of all, to follow up what Trish said, I had somebody talk to me, not knowing my connection to council, about the problem that she was having with her 13-year-old daughter accessing bus transport to and from Aurora, which does not involve her having to walk enormous distances home from somewhere like Southern Girls High, because the bus connections don't go down South Invercargill on the west side. So they don't cross over. I guess they go up from Aurora to Girls High, might be the nearest point for her. She's in Collins Street area.
So what I would suggest, if you've got a specific, we can.
Yeah.
Because what we often find is that the people who bring us a problem, we've looked at it and we actually get all the routes out and we say, well, why don't you do this? And they go, oh,
Yeah.
can you do that? Because often sometimes it's a mix between a school bus and a council bus smart.
Yeah, so I looked
knowing
at
how to
it
do
and I
it.
wasn't sure what the answer was, and so I raise it. If I couldn't see what the answer was and I use the buses, I'm not quite sure the solution to a problem. But the question I had within that was, how nimble are we with the bus routes for, say, the school bus routes, which I think might vary certainly year from year. So if we're too close-minded about this is what we delivered last year, so that's what we're going to deliver next year, without talking to the schools about where their enrolment patterns are going, is that one of the things we could be doing smarter? It's a question. I don't have the solution.
I think it's about trying to find that balance, and that's one of the things that we've continued. I'm very regimented because it's on the map and it's where you're supposed to go. It's a schedule. We have to do a whole lot of other things that support it. Others have a little bit more flexibility with the drivers, and I think sometimes it is actually a little bit more fluid than we perhaps would always imagine. But the school bus stuff is about actually understanding where the kids are, and you're 100% right. This year we might have 10 kids in one area and then next year there's no one. So but the way the school bus routes have been designed have generally been pretty successful because they are full, and we solved most of the problems. So.
Oh, absolutely. But it raised the question for me, how nimble are we? So thank you. The other thing is which you've mentioned, the beginning and the end of the day. Now, for me to come here, and I generally am a bus user, but for me to come here to be at council at 8:30, that's not possible by bus, unless I get up really, really, really early, because my bus would come at 25 to 8. So I think there must be a lot of people in the same position as me. Likewise, if the chair were to go on a long time at the infrastructure meeting and we didn't leave until 5:05, I would find it challenging to actually make the bus, to go home by bus. And there must be a lot of people in that position as well. That Pardon?
Set a target.
For you to finish before 5:05? Absolutely. But for a lot of working people, are those times actually really working for them? Pardon the expression. Because we're not really fitting around people's fixed working times, as opposed to, you know, if you start work at 9, you could catch the bus into town, but you probably then don't finish before 5, so you might not be able to make the bus home at
So
night.
that's why we've recognised that perhaps we've been we've tried pretty hard to I guess find that careful balance between service and cost, and we've probably recognised that we probably have been a bit harsh in some of those beginning end.
And not everybody travels to the centre of city to work.
Yeah.
They might travel from the north part of town to the hospital. So they've got to have 2 bus trips to get there, and or the other way around. So it's really easy to run a bus service if everybody works at the same place and lives in the same house. Unfortunately, that's not what happens. So it is a game of jigsaw, really puzzles, trying to get them together. So.
No, I appreciate how things are going. I just, as a user, I'm mindful what I see as the limitations, but thank you.
And that's why we've put up costs to suggest that we do need to perhaps extend that service, which we'll need to meet.
Ria.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Russell, I just wanted to jog your memory back. Throughout previous workshops, this council has posed questions like, should we hand back delegation for a public transport service to, was it?
Yes.
Yes. And if we do, what are the cost benefit savings from that versus the negative impact statement from our community and the needs of our community? So I still, for me, that's not completely been answered yet or thrashed out in robust discussions while we're considering what council directions for the future could be. Alongside of that, we're looking at the way technology is changing around our country, and also the way that our community needs are changing in terms of also their work situations and hours, whether they can work hybrid or not, or a lot of community lives are changing as well, which is impacting on our bus services. What I'm kind of trying to get my head around is the on-demand services concept, and then the IT that we've got to have to support that, and things like that. So I'm looking at the cost benefit to us as a service provider. What would be to improve and meet central government policy with decarbonising our buses, smaller fleets, so that those buses can be full, and what would that cost be, just approximately, versus those other costs, or too big a question? Come back to me later.
Too big a question, but I guess the first part is the delegation. Yes, we've still got that as an ongoing conversation, and I think somewhere, I guess we raise it because it might not necessarily be the immediate change, but it could actually be that that's a conversation that we need to contemplate over the next LTP or something. There might be a time we might still believe that we're best placed to deliver the service, because there are lots of councils across the country who are actually wanting it from their regional council, not actually giving it back. So that's the thing. We need to understand what would be we'd lose or benefit. I think you questioned about how do we actually make our services as nimble without investing huge amounts of capital that lock us in, I suppose, is the real thing. And part of that is the conversation with whomever our future contractor is, because their viability and our viability is actually linked in some respect in there. They're not going to want to buy brand new buses that we say 2 years later, sorry, we don't want them anymore, because we'll pay the privilege of that. But at the same time, if they've seen huge benefits elsewhere across the country where they've seen something similar that's worked really efficiently, we'll also challenge them to bring that concept to us. And we know that on-demand buses work better for some things, but not for others. So scheduled bus service is still the most cost-effective way to do it. The on-demand services typically cost more per trip, but they perhaps give you a little bit more flexibility for location.
Okay.
And we've got chunks where we you got to walk the 500 metres to a bus, and that's the reality of everybody can't be lucky enough to have a bus stop and bus shelter outside their house.
Correct.
All right, we'll wind that up now. Thanks very much. That's right on time, 5:02. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Russell, are you staying for the next one? No.
That's enough of me, thanks.
He's out of here.
You are discharged now.
Thank you.
Right, next one is in fact, the last one today is regulatory services. And Jonathan, welcome. And Gillian.
Kia ora. Thank you for seeing us at short notice.
Transport still has control of PowerPoint.
Okay, so we're going to cover what we refer to as one of the more exciting parts of the organisation, regulatory services activity. So the regulatory services activity is responsible for the delivery of the key legislative requirements relating to building planning, food, alcohol, environmental health, parking compliance, animal control, environmental health and litter. It is hard to think of anybody in the community that isn't touched by one of the activities that we're responsible for, either drawing on the service or if they're somewhat naughty, they may find us at the doorstep. Actually, just to go back to that, so we've got three teams in the group at the moment, which is building and planning, which I've been covering previously. Gillian covers environmental services. We also have property records. I've been covering them as well at the moment. So. Let's get through this. So our current budget, I can barely make it out without my glasses. So essentially, we've got about somewhere in the region of 37 to 38 FTEs. We do also, in building and planning, we make use of contractors to carry out some of the functions, in particular building consent processing. We tend not to draw on the services of consultants so much. Consultants would typically work in the policy space. We have used them, but we're trying to limit our use of them and try and grow some of the capability in-house. Okay,
So in terms of maintaining levels of service for environmental services, one of the challenges over the next LTP is going to be ensuring that we have cost recovery of our services set at the correct levels. We've got fees that we're able to set ourselves, such as our fees for Food Act. Then we have other fees that are set by legislation, such as alcohol and also parking infringements. In terms of our food verification and alcohol, we also need to ensure that we have our cost recovery set at 100% for where we're providing services into other councils. We do that for Clutha and Gore, where we, in Clutha, we provide Food Act, environmental health and alcohol services. In Clutha, we provide them with just the Food Act services. Other shared services that we have that we also need to ensure that we've got our cost recovery correct is the shared service arrangement that we have with Southland District Council at our animal care facility, where they have a long-term licence for 5 kennels at the ACF. That is charged out on a 5 of 28 cost for the operating cost for the year annually, and then they pay the daily rate for whenever they have dogs in the facility. One of the other key areas that we've got around parking that we need to consider going forward is nationally there is a review of infringement fees that has been going on for the past 18 odd months. We have no confirmed timeline or fee structure for this yet, but it will likely be coming in the next 3 years. The fees, infringement fees, are likely to rise significantly as you've got areas such as the big cities around Auckland, Wellington and that, where currently the infringement fees are much cheaper than parking. So we're likely to see significant increases there. we're not sure what that will do to our infringement income in Invercargill, if that would see a significant increase, assuming that we would have the same levels of infringements, or if we're likely to see people more inclined to actually pay for their parking or ensure that they're not receiving infringements. Other things that we've got to consider around levels of service is we're seeing more and more a backdrop of increasing aggression in the community, particularly with some of our roles such as parking officers and animal control. In the animal control space, we're wanting to have a significant focus on decreasing the number of unregistered dogs in the district. So there's two levels of that there. There's the unregistered dogs that we know about because they've been registered in the past and they're not currently registered. And then there's the unregistered population that we don't know about. So a lot of work covering both of those areas. We're also looking to ensure that we're using education as much as possible around compliance, education and assisting people to comply being more cost effective than enforcement or directed enforcement for compliance. Jonathan.
So yeah, I think on the whole with regulatory, we feel that we're providing a service to the community that meets the expectations of the community. I often say that good regulatory function tends to be fairly silent. You only notice it when it's missing. So if we look at planning and building, and also property records, so Gillian touched on this. In general, the expectation is that the user pays. Where you're drawing on a service from Invercargill City Council, you should bear the costs of it. The current LTP we have, it allows a certain amount of flexibility between what we're recovering from cost of the service, but also what we're being rated for, and it's marginal, so it actually runs between 10 and 50. One of the challenges we have is that some of the functions that we carry out are quite easily cost recoverable, the cost of a building consent or a resource consent, for example. Other activities that we have to undertake that the community expects us to undertake aren't quite so cost recoverable. For example, abandoned vehicles, people that dump them on the beach and set fire to them. That can impose significant costs on us. I think it's fair to say that previously ICC hasn't had a real compliance focus, particularly with building, and it has been quite a challenge over the last 3 years to bring that up to sit where it actually needs to be. We have a few legacy issues, and obviously the longer you leave them, the harder it tends to be. Some of the work is probably overdue by a decade. We'd had good fortune in that many of you as elected members will be aware that we often report on our interactions with International Accreditation New Zealand, IANZ, who accredit us for both building but also environmental health. With building, they tend to have quite a narrow focus, which is on the issue of building consents. Where compliance matters are concerned, there probably wasn't so much of an incentive to perform in that area because it wasn't regularly reviewed. That changed in 2020 and they started reviewing that. Invercargill City Council we were one of the first up to be reviewed, and there were a few elements where we had quite a bit of work to do around fencing of swimming pools, compliance schedules, updating the compliance schedules, and also building warrant of fitness audits. We've been on a 3-year project to reduce that to something that's manageable. We've had to regularly report to MB, and I'm really pleased to say that we've reached the point now where we have that under control, but it has come at a cost. And I think what has come out of this is that cost will now be ongoing. Compliance isn't just something that you can suddenly bring up to date and then put away again. What you tend to find with compliance is that it nudges better behaviours from the community. And it's a little like housework, a little and often tends to be the cheaper option. Typically where you're taking a reasonable line and helping people and encouraging them to perform as good citizens, it tends to work out easier for us. Where we let it go, the costs of then carrying out enforcement action can be quite expensive. As with any service, the cost of maintaining existing service levels increases year on year. Prices very rarely go down, and I don't think anyone would suggest that we would want to reduce our level of service here either. There are some interlinked elements to it. The cost of consents, whether they be resource consents or builder consents, it does have implications for projects, and so that also links to the growth of Invercargill. To refer to my earlier point on compliance, monitoring, compliance and enforcement, it's not largely cost recoverable. We're required to take the action, and we need to get those better behaviours. It can be counterproductive where we're going in with a stick as our first method and imposing high costs on people to comply when that money arguably may be better used in actually achieving a level of compliance first up. I think a really good example here is the tragedy of the Loafers Lodge fire. We had the satisfaction as a council of knowing that we had actually undertaken our building warrant and fitness activities properly, and that we had actually already made an assessment of those type of buildings, and we were working with building owners to get better outcomes from it. One of the other issues, and this was largely an 11th hour part, is that with planning in particular, it looks as though the RMA reform is starting to ratchet up. It's last week the select committee have indicated that they're likely to recommend that both the new pieces of legislation that we previously talked about in workshops are enacted. I have every reason to believe they'll be enacted before the election. As to when they'll come into force, that's a different matter, but it's likely to change the direction that council has to move in regard to policy. And as we've already talked about at a previous workshop, there's a need to do some policy work on our current district plan. There is a concern that it's likely we'll be working on both the new RMA reform as well as our current district plan. Potentially the value of working on the current district plan to change, put in some plan changes that will enable development and housing. It's not an opportunity I imagine that the council would wish to let slide on. That has implications for the costs of providing regulatory function. The challenge here is going to be it's very difficult to even predict what those costs are likely to be. We could potentially have to do more work in the policy area. Looking at property records, one of the issues we have there is that currently the process is very manual and time consuming. We still haven't achieved 50% of property record digitisation. We tend to field a large number of inquiries from the community in regard to property file requests, and we're required to make reasonable access. So we tend to have to do a lot of manual handling. The digitisation project is set to finish in April next year. One of the key pieces of work that we want to look at moving forward from that is the potential to put the information online. For those of you that are familiar with Queenstown, they have the eDoc system. Potentially there's a lot of cost savings in there where people can look up their own property records. It's not without privacy issues. Indications are it won't be effortless to implement, but it certainly has a potential, I'd say, within the next 2 or 3 years to assist us. In the meantime, we're probably having to use around about 2 FTEs per week just to deal with property file requests and move the information around. There's also a need to look at some of the processes that property records are responsible for, in particular land information memorandums, LIMs. We're legislatively required to do those. We're undertaking some work as to just how much information we have to capture. Traditionally it was quite a brief overview. Central government have provided direction that they expect us to apply far more diligence around completing LIMs and actually making sure that we are providing the information and that we're going into a reasonable amount of depth. That does carry a fair amount of liability for the council. So in terms of options, an increase in funding is required to maintain current service delivery due to the increased cost of service delivery year on year. An increase in funding will be required for compliance activities in order to avoid imposing unreasonable costs on those who do comply. When we were looking at setting the fees, it was becoming clear that people who were obtaining building consents were starting to unreasonably bear the burden of the cost of service delivery. And it's probably reasonable to say that people would anticipate that with a user pays system that then becomes inequitable. And again, just to return to the theme of we now meet our obligations as a territorial authority. An increase in funding is going to be required to ensure that we maintain meeting those obligations. In response to requests from elected members regarding the potential to improve the appearance of non-heritage buildings in the CBD, there is a paper coming to council, I think on the 25th of July, outlining some options. Having discussed the matter with other councils, they've strongly recommended incentivising where possible. They've found that the compliance stick doesn't work so well. Arguably, the Building Act's not the best piece of legislation to deal with the appearance of buildings. It deals with the safety of buildings. So an increase in funding may be required depending on which way the council wants to go in that direction. And also the fourth bullet point is regarding the RMA reform. There's likely to be some quite serious cost implications for us with the regional spatial strategy. Currently, there is a joint initiative between councils to work on a regional spatial plan at the moment, which is in process. We're expecting a report actually this month that should be coming up to council to explain the progress that we've made so far. With the RMA reform, the regional spatial work becomes mandated. The indications are that they'll send councils in what they in tranches. Obviously, we're not going to be in the first tranche. It would seem that they've already set the councils that they're going to work on that with already, but it could be we could be directed to go in the second tranche, which I would suggest would be somewhere within 2 to 3 years. As I said, that could then lead us into the unfortunate position of having to work on our district plan to get some plan changes at the same time as having to work on regional spatial work, which will, it's fair to say we're currently not geared up for it with the planning team. It will inevitably impose additional costs.
Opportunities for cost savings in the environmental services area. Under an animal control later this year, we're going to start engaging with the community regarding a move for a tag for life for the dog registration process. While this won't result in any cost savings in the first year, and subsequent years it will. At the same time, we will also look to moving our registration process to email as much as possible, removing one of the biggest expenditures from the dog registration process, which is postage. As we continue to ensure that we have a high number of dogs registered in the community, this will also have an impact on the fees for dog registration. In terms of environmental health, there are limited opportunities to reduce the cost of service, and as I mentioned previously, the focus will be ensuring on the fact that we've got accurate cost recovery and 100% cost recovery for services provided to other councils. And within parking compliance, again, our fees are set by legislation. So limited opportunities for cost recovery across the service. Within the animal control area as well, we've got some planned projects and prioritising other projects around the animal welfare code and health and safety that will reduce our reserve over time.
Sorry. Yeah, so taken as a whole with regulatory, the opportunities for cost savings are few and far between unless we look at reducing service. Some of the items that we have looked at are a renewed focus on cost recovery, also a systems review based on lean principles. Ensuring that we're not putting too many steps in the process. We have undertaken some work with the teams already. If you take the position that when someone applies to us for, say, a resource consent or a building consent, there are parts of the process that add value for them. There are also parts of the process that don't, and we need to just be aware that whilst we may consider some of those parts of the process are required to add value for us as the regulator, we can sometimes get into a position where there are also parts of the process that just aren't adding value for either party. And so we're starting to review those systems and asking ourselves if there's a better, faster way of delivering service. It's in its infancy, and it's not a silver bullet by any means. It does take time to work through these things. It has to move in line with some of the other work that the organisation's doing, business enhancement program, etc. We're also looking at the cost of current systems in comparison with others. So when I first started here, we'd taken on a piece of building consent processing software. It's time to ask ourselves if that's the most effective way, if there's a cheaper way. Other councils actually have their own editable forms that they've created that is submitted via a portal, and that they can review, and that is arguably a cheaper system. So we're starting to work with other councils to see if they've got better ways of doing it.
So
Right, are we finished with the slides?
And obviously, fourth point is create efficiency. I think we've got 3 more slides to go through.
Okay, we'll go to the end of the slides.
Okay. So proposals for new or lifted level of service. Do you want to cover your one?
The focus in environmental services will be on ensuring our shared services, enhancing our shared services contracts with our territorial authorities. We'll be looking to ensure that all of our services are online for our application processes across all of our areas. And another area that is possible to look at is using CCTV as a tool for parking enforcement. That does remove an element of your education focus if you move to doing something like that.
Okay, and so with planning and building, obviously we've touched on policy work. RMA reform is going to put more of a lens on that for us, along with the district plan review. And we're bringing a paper on an initiative to promote improved appearance of non-heritage buildings in the city centre. With property records, I've already talked on the potential for online access. There's also the the reintroduction of project information memorandums, PIMs. Typically, if you apply for a building consent, as part of that, you can apply for a project information memorandum. That will then mean that checks are carried out to ensure that your project is feasible, that it's going to meet with the requirements of the district plan. It is entirely possible, if you don't obtain a PIM, to actually uplift a building consent that you simply can't build under the district plan. We undertake those checks to ensure that that's not going to happen, but arguably we need to make sure that people are uplifting PIMs because those checks need to be paid for, and the project information memorandum's a proper platform to do it on. So options council to consider, as already stated, overall there's little to no scope for reducing service levels below the current state without increasing risk and liability to the council. Council could consider, if they wish, to review their risk appetite in regard to undertaking regulatory functions. These are the options in regard to improving the appearance of buildings in the CBD. Option 1 will be the regulatory enforcement approach, which is to attempt to use the Building Act. Option 2 will be an enabling approach. Option 3 is an incentive fund, and then option 4 is no additional action. So those will be brought up to council on the 25th of July. In terms of measuring performance, we have legislative KPIs for building resource consents, food and alcohol applications, it's 100% within the statutory timeframes, which are typically 20 working days. Also, we promote incentives to owners of heritage buildings, especially when they undertake earthquake strengthening. So we have the heritage building program that has been highly successful to date. And then also we have the number of land information memorandums issued within 10 working days. So we're not proposing any additional KPIs other than the legislative ones. That's it.
Right. Thank you. Questions, Pania?
I'll probably. My question was really around with the COVID shift to online services, and it's really good seeing that dog registration, all that. It's great. You said, is there more work needed to be done around building and planning, around building consents and more processes?
There's always more work needed. We have to keep up with the times. Invercargill City Council quite revolutionary when they introduced video inspections, and that's been quite a game changer for the industry. There's always the potential. One of the challenges though is that people tend to work on a variety of media and platforms. Some people are very good at electronic stuff, other people just deal in paper, and we are legally required to provide all those avenues. It can be quite challenging. It's not often, but occasionally we do have to accept large paper applications over the counter.
Rhea.
Thank you for your in-depth scope there. Found it quite interesting. I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. Under the animal control area, I realise that we have I don't know what you call it, good dog behaviour subsidy. You talked about, of the animals that have been registered but not currently registered. Is it something that, in forward thinking, that the council could do an amnesty weekend to allow people to bring their dogs in, to get inspected, to get chipped, to get whatever we want? We partnership up with our community businesses to allow that enablement to happen, so it takes away the fear process of, oh my god, my dog's not registered, I owe so much money, and get slapped on the hand. How about we take that barrier away from them as part of our well-being of our community, include their dogs inside of that too? Other thing is the tag for life concept of the animals. What happens when the animal dies beyond its lifespan? Will people be expected to get a reimbursement for the scope of the life that they didn't live out to? I mean, I can see some operational issues within that, within that policy. I mean, I think it's good, but it's like maybe a little bit of consideration needs to go.
It's just a name. It just means you don't have to change tags every year.
Still got to register your dog every year.
It would be, but then if you're going to do like a tag for life and they go, oh well, our dog got killed last week, it's not for life, so can we get some reimbursement back on that tag?
Doesn't change the cost of registration every year.
No, you still got
I know.
You've got to pay registration.
Yep,
every year.
I realise that.
You do now get a reimbursement, don't you, if your dog dies?
There is, under the Act, it's a pro rata, and it's based on when you notify us that your dog has died, not
But
when your
on
dog
that-
died.
On that same question though, those tags don't last. I don't
No,
think they last,
that's the other thing.
The life, that's the only thing. So what about getting new ones and things,
Yeah, we would have to have the ability to be able to have replacement tags. There's a number of councils that have done this already. There was a number that have started this year with this year's registration, a number last year and the year before. So we can do a lot of learning from what other councils have gone through already, like their pain points from when they've done it.
Right, okay, that sounds good. And my only other commentary was on the comment that you made about the CCTV being used as a parking infringement tool. And I just need some clarification on that, because when we talked about the CCTV coverage and our investment in that, it was more for like community safety of our businesses, and now we're looking at opening it up more to finding people for a parking infringement. I'm kind of thinking, did we consult and put it out there on that basis as well?
Yeah, but nobody gets a ticket for doing something right, Rhea.
I realise that, Darren.
They're only
But
getting
it's
sent a ticket
actually
'cause they did
looking at the
something wrong.
regulatory areas of what the tools are
I
being used
think
for.
I think when it comes to the CCTV, and I can talk about this, the actual system when it goes in will have a lot of features, and whether you use them or not, I mean, number plate recognition is one, and that'll be definitely used for traffic control.
Yep.
Whether that's used for parking is another thing. The other thing is that these new systems have facial recognition, and that, of course, is a Privacy Act thing, and they also have features like if you red cap, blue jacket, and whatever, you can follow that. You could literally track.
Yeah.
Those features are embedded, but whether you use them or not is up to another. It's up to
Agency.
policy and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So I think having the tool available for parking is a good thing to have if it's suitable. Yeah. So, we have to go in 2 minutes. So, Evelyn.
Just a clarification. If you microchip your dog, the vet does that, and it's registered on a register. Do we get notified about that, or is that one of the discussions we should be having? Because that would mean we would know the existence of dogs that we perhaps currently don't know about. On the other hand, when vets then put a dog to sleep, that would be able to notify that is a dog out of the system. I'm just trying to think about what happens now. Who benefits from the microchipping? What information is collected? To whom is it given? And where do we fit in that in terms of environmental control, the Dog Control Act, and all those sorts of things? And how can we make all those pieces of legislation work together to make the costs cheaper for a dog owner, but also make our work a little bit easier?
It's currently the responsibility of the dog owner to ensure that they provide us with microchip, but we do work with vets to, if they don't know what it is, but they do know who their vet is, we will talk to them. And in terms of when your dog is passed, again, it's the responsibility of you as the owner to pass that information on to us, and there is a refund available. The information, when it comes to council, goes into our council systems and also onto the National Dog Database. You can also choose to pay a fee to have your microchip number for your cat or dog, sorry, but it does do cats as well, onto the New Zealand Companion Animal Register. But we tend to deal with our registers and the NDD. The huge advantage is that if you've got your animal microchipped, then if it gets out, even if you're the best owner in the world and it manages to sneak out somehow, then we can scan your dog, we can get it home pretty quickly.
So,
right.
I think I was the first one to register my dog on the new system, because it actually didn't allow me to do a payment, but we did catch up on that. But in saying that, you have to load all that information. But the other thing I just want to build on what you said around the chipping is that if you de-sex your dog, it's cheaper. I mean, I think that's a choice thing, so whether you de-sex your dog or don't de-sex your dog, but why are we charging more if you choose not to de-sex your dog?
To encourage people to de-sex them.
Well, that's a cost to people as well.
I think, look, we need to wind this up now, but as chair, I'll just, before I hand over to Rhiannon, just a couple of my comments. Being a dog owner, I feel tags for a start. There's two types of tags. There's the disc that's got a wee wiry thing. They don't last long. If you get the other one and manage to put it on, it'll never come off. So that's fantastic. That the one you've got to push through and punch and click. As far as de-sexing goes, problem dogs are the ones that are still intact, unfortunately, as far as aggression goes to other dogs and everything. So I am a true believer that there should be a discount for behaviour of the de-sexed dogs. So that's why and I believe also that our dog fees are extremely cheap. If we can pay for our entire service at $51 for a dog that's got all the good behaviour and everything, then that's amazing. I just looked at Palmerston North. The cheapest you can pay there is $92 for everything. So if we can fund our entire department on that, we're doing real good. Thank you. I'd like to spend a bit more, actually. Maybe on barking dogs.
You can always donate money, Reggie, at any time.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So we're going to wind that up. Before we close down, Rhiannon's going to say a couple of words.
So thank you, everyone. We will come out with a document which will include all the options that the managers have presented today through this workshop. If you can respond and give an indication of the areas that are priorities for you, that will help the managers in bringing forward the final plans and options for decision by council. You've heard a lot today, I know, so I think that's a good way of doing it in terms of you'll have a document you can go through at a time that's convenient. And then we'll do the same after the next 2 workshops as well. That's it. Yep.
So thanks everyone. We've now very soon got a presentation on the 1225. Is that right?
Yep.
Yep.